Hello again. Some more questions. I'm going to have to back up. This time we're going back to Colorado Springs. I got the question, how did I get to work? Okay, we would get on the bus about 2 o'clock or a little after and ride clear across town, which took probably pretty close to a half an hour. And then I worked on the third floor of this hospital. And like I said before, I did the same thing the cadets did, but I had to wear the white uniform like the nurses. Their uniforms were blue, and one of my jobs was to take the flowers out at night, see that they're watered, and take drinks and serve trays and help give baths, or if the room someone left, well, we had to clean the room. And I was kind of lucky there because I knew one of those cadets. Her name was Bernadine Jones. She lived in Canerada, and we knew each other through 4-H. And she was about a year older. Anyway, she was in her cadet year. And these cadets would study in the morning and then out of class in the afternoon and work the floor otherwise. Well, one of the jobs that I had to do right away was to help clean up a room if someone moved out. And everything was all right except making the beds. And Bernadine was teaching me how to make these beds, and the bottom sheet had to be so tight that you're supposed to be able to flip a coin on them. Well, I never could flip a coin on mine, but at least I learned how to corner those sheets and so on. And another thing that I got to do was go down to the kitchen, and they had a thing that would squeeze orange juice. And so that was one of my jobs, was to see this big container up on my floor was full of orange juice and see that we had ice cream up there. And so outside of that, I just did whatever I was needed to do. But I want to tell you about the one patient that I can really remember. She was a lady, I don't know, 70s or 80s, and she was not a model patient. In fact, is the first time I went in there and seen her, she says, "Where's your hat?" And I told her, I said, "I'm not a nurse, I'm just a helper. I'm just to do here whatever you want me to do." And she didn't say a thing, she just turned the other way. And so they told me that she was supposed to be one that I would kind of take care of. And she hardly ever would talk. Well, this one evening, the nurses gave her shots, of course, and pills. And I'd taken her tray. Now, why I didn't push it back, or whether the nurse didn't when she came in, because the tray was up there for me to help feed her. If she, sometimes she needed feeding, sometimes she didn't. And anyway, I just stepped back, and the nurse leaned over her to give her the shot or whatever she was going to do. And her bed was rolled up, but she could set up if she wanted to. And she grabbed that tray and just threw it at that nurse. And it went all down the front of her. And of course, that didn't make her any points. And she told me, she said, "Would you please go get the janitor and then come back and help clean up this mess?" And she was mad. And her name was Mrs. Meadowbrook. She had turned the other way. And I just know she was laughing. Anyway, we got up there and got things all cleaned up. We had to put a new sheet on and so on. And I heard the nurse say, "You probably won't get any dinner." And so after the nurse went out and so on, and I was fluffing her pillow, I said, "Do you want me to see if I can go get you some dinner?" And she told me I wasn't going to get any dinner. And I said, "Well, I'll see what I can do." So I went out and talked to the supervisor, and by that it had spread all over the floor about the mood that Mrs. Meadowbrook was in. And the supervisor said, "Well, you go down to the kitchen and see if they've got anything." But she said, as late as it is, there probably isn't another tray. So I went down there and got her some toast and a tea bag. I was going to be careful before I made the tea. And some ice cream, because she liked ice cream. So I took it back up there, and she told me I wasn't going to get any supper or dinner, and I said, well, I got you something if you want to eat it. But she did. She sat up and she ate the whole thing and the ice cream, and everything was fine. So I took her tray, and then every night I'd make a point to go in and tell her good night, because they'd already told me that she was one of my patients. And another time we were in there, it was really, really hot in that afternoon. And I went in and asked her, I said, would you like me to bring some cool water and I'd wash your hands? And so she said, it isn't time to take a bath. And I said, no, it won't be a bath. I said, I'll just wash your arms and face off and so on, maybe cool you off a little bit. So she didn't say a word. I went and got the water and just set it on the tray. And a nurse came in again, or it could have at that time, I don't know. But anyhow, she just sat up straight in bed. And they did whatever they had to do, but if she got a chance to kick one of the nurses, she'd kick them. And anyway, they leaned over to do their thing again. Well, this time I started to move the water backward, but they were kind of in my way. This time she took a hold of the side of that pan and just threw it. Well, it missed the nurse, but it hit me. And it hit mostly just from like my knees down and washed off my painted stockings. So I had a lot of runners the rest of that shift. But I thought they treated her a little bit rough, especially the cadet nurses. And it was their job to see that she was settled in evidently in the mornings and so on. So one afternoon I was in there and I asked her, after I brought her water, I said, would you like for me to brush your hair? And she said, they don't brush my hair. They pull it with that comb. They pull it hard too. I said, well, why don't you let me brush it and I'll braid it? She said, you'd braid my hair? And her hair was long and black and real stringy, and it hung down below her shoulders. And so I said, you sit up or lean up as best you can, and I'll brush your hair. So she did. She sat right up, and she sat, and we brushed it, and we braided it. And she said, I'll be all right if they don't take the braids out. And she was rubbing her braids like this, and it held down on her shoulder. So after that, that was my job, to take care of her hair. And it was almost 2 months, I never saw one visitor. Of course, she could have had visitors in the morning or something, but on my shift from 3 to 11, I never ever saw a visitor in there. And one night I didn't have much to do before I went off, so I went in and asked her, I said, would you like me to read to you tonight? And she had a book, and it was full of poems. I never ever saw her open that book, but she said, if you want to. And so I read to her for about, I don't know, 20 minutes maybe. And I told her, I said, well, you know, it's just about time for me to go home. And so I'll have to quit reading, so let me, get you settled and you go to sleep, and I'll see you tomorrow. And so I started reading and got her all tucked in. I went to say goodnight, and she reached up and she squeezed my arm, and she kind of smiled. And that was the first time that she'd ever made any gesture. And I think the first time I'd seen half smiles a little bit, because she got, well, I'm not going to say she liked me, but we got along. And I said, okay, I'll see you tomorrow. And so I signed out, and the next day when I checked back in, they told me that Mrs. Meadowbrook had died at 1 o'clock that morning. And I think probably, to tell the truth, the rest of them were kind of relieved she was gone, but I missed her the whole time I was there. There was other patients, but there were none like Mrs. Meadowbrook. And so then going home, we rode the bus home again, and we wouldn't get off of the bus till probably 11:45 maybe. And then we'd had about 5 blocks to walk. Well, right along the place where we got off of the bus, there was a lumber yard, and it was a long building, and then there was just a narrow alley, and right there was a lamplight, and it was a lamp post. It wasn't too bright, but at least you could see. And then about a fourth away block down the blockway, houses started, and so we'd ride there and get off, and Thelma would always get on first, coming home, and then pick me up at the bus. And we'd get off, of course, we'd start telling stories of what had happened each day and not paying much attention to where we were going. And one day at night, we was talking, we got, about 3/4 of the way there, and we looked over at this lamppost, and there stood the awfulest looking guy you ever saw. And I don't know whether he exposed himself or whether he was just standing there or what, but he wasn't saying a word. He was just looking straight ahead. And it didn't bother me at all. Thelma and I just walked out and walked down the street. She was just shaking. She says, "Is he following us?" I turned around and said, "No, he's still there." And we walked home and went in, and she was still really shook up when we went in. And when I got in there, I got to thinking, I said, you know what? If he'd have been sitting behind this long building, he could have hit either one of us or grabbed us or done anything. And we never ever told anybody we saw him, which we should have. We should have called the police or something. But when we got home, but anyway, when we seen him, we just walked out of the street and right on straight down. Well, then when I got home, I got shaken. I thought, what if? But anyhow, I think we only had a couple or 3 days, because it was the 1st of August we were going home. And it was time. And then I've already told you the story about us going home and so on. Well, when I got home, I told Dad, and I'd kind of been thinking about it all my senior year. I said, I think I want to go into either the Ways or something and be a cadet nurse, because I said, I really like that job. He said, well, I tell you what. He said, you teach your first year of school, because he said, you've got your contract, you've got to teach. And if you don't like it then, he says, I'll put you through regular nurses training. And whenever I'd mention going into the service, everybody that I knew would say no. Kenny was saying no. And then when I got a letter from Bob, Bob said, no, you don't want the service. So I had gave that up. But I just knew 1 year of teaching, and I'm going to go back out there. Well, that first year, and I've told you about it before, was a perfect grade, class, school, whatever, for a beginner teacher with only 7 kids, 4 classes. And them kids were great kids, and I knew the folks and school board and so on, so I couldn't have had a better year. And right before school was out, well, I'll tell you, during the winter, Lorene and I would still, like I said, still going to Bird City every Wednesday night, and a couple of different episodes happened. One time, I was going to school with some gasoline and kerosene to start the fire, and the jug that I had it in tipped over, and It didn't spill, it just tipped over. Well, instead of stopping the car like I should have, I just reached down to get it. Well, when I reached down, I turned the steering wheel, and in the ditch I went. Well, evidently they must have been watching because you could see down that far from home. So here come Dad in the truck and hauled me to school, started my fire. And I guess he went home and either got Mother or pulled a truck out or something, a car out or something. Anyway, he got it out. At the other time, Lorene and I went to Bird City to the dance, and she had just kind of today we would call it just a shack or a shed or something, where she roomed with the people that she was in. It wasn't in their house or anything. It was just out in this shed, and it was heated with a Brooder stove. Now I don't know what our Brooder house stove is, but it's not much. But it heated this little building that she had. Well, anyway, that night it was kind of cold. Instead of her taking me on home, why, I just stayed all night with her. Well, the next morning it had snowed, and I mean, it was pretty deep snow. And so at that time, she didn't have a telephone, and of course, no phones to call the folks. So Lorene said, well, I'll take you home. Well, we got out, and that snow was pretty deep. Well, we hadn't gone very far, and here come Dad in the truck. I guess he knew he didn't trust either one of us. And so my Mother had fixed my lunch. I think I was kind of spoiled staying there. Anyway, Mother fixed lunch, and Dad took me to school that morning and started the fire. And every once in a while, I had a school board member, and I was usually at school by 7:30 to get the school warm for the kids. And I wasn't too great at making fires, but several times, one of the school board members, or usually his name was Ted Christensen, he would come over and start the fire and have it warm for the kids, and usually warm by the time I got there. So one morning he was over there and he had the fire going, and he did drink a little bit. Well, he came in and had the fire going and so on, and 9 o'clock came and he was still there. So I thought, and he stood on one side of the stove and I was on the other. And the kids were all kind of playing. Well, it was 10 o'clock or 9 o'clock. And I told the kids, I said, why don't you have your quiet reading first? And so at 9:30, he was still there. And I told him, I said, well, these kids got to have some classes. So he said, all right. So he fixed the fire and he left. But he fixed the fire for me. And then I think the nicest thing that probably ever happened is right before school was out, but it was in the last month, and he'd come over to pick up his boys, and he said, if you teach next year, he said, we want to offer you a contract. So I got a contract. It was after school before they brought it up, but I thought that was pretty nice. And then later, one of my other school board members, he must have moved to town not too long after my second year, because he was on the same job that Kenny was. And he told him, he said, she had the makings of a good teacher, but she's had a little ways to go. And she was the one that wasn't invited to the wedding.
An apple for the teacher, that seems the thing to do, because I want to learn about romance from you. An apple for the teacher, just to show that I'm meek and mild.